Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ota, and today we're going to be talking about what it really costs to be the strong one and why high capacity women often break down in private. You've heard the saying, right? They say it's lonely at the top, but they never tell you why. It's not because you're alone, it's because no one really sees you. You've always been the capable one, the reliable one, the woman people lean on and look up to. But what happens when you don't want to be the strong one anymore? So today's episode isn't about burnout, right? That buzzword that's been going around the block since 2020. It's about identity. It's about what happens when the version of you that's being praised and getting all the accolades, the accomplishments, the applause, isn't the one that feels true to you anymore. And if this is you, if you've been leading from pressure, trying to keep it all together while silently falling apart, I'm here today to remind you that you're not broken. You're just buried under all of that pressure to perform. And it's time to come up for air. And what really inspired this episode today is one, I've been on a parasite cleanse for about a month or so now. And I just got checked up again. And apparently they're still living in there, still in my gut. So I'm another round of this parasite cleanse, so pray for me. And also, about 2 weeks ago, we lost someone from our church board. And it's not like I've known her for years, but we become really close in these last couple of months ever since she joined our church board as the treasurer. And in that short time, she impacted me deeply. I didn't realize how much as a leader I relied on the people in my team. And, there were times where I thought I had to do it alone because I didn't always have competent people that surrounded me. A lot of times I felt like I was the most competent person in the room, not patting myself on the back, but there were things, that just came easily to me. And leadership was one of those things. And delegation was one of those things. And when, you're around certain people, you can probably attest to this as a leader. It's really easy to lead when the people who surround you and support you get you. And Gail was one of those people. When she came on board, she asked the right questions, provided the right amount of support. And, now that she's gone, I'm really feeling the void. And so, right, I'm grieving not only the loss of a friend, but grieving the loss of one of my team members, a very integral part of the team. And I'm realizing that when you have the right people around you, it really makes leadership that much easier. And I realized for how many years, I really had to be the strong one because now that she's gone, there are things that we had to really shift and change. One, because she was going to be the host for our event this month. And so there were a lot of things that she played an integral part in, and we had to shift that very quickly once she passed. And there was this whole piece of grieving, but at the same time, the show must go on. Meaning, right, there are times where you do have to lead and you do have to be the capable one. But how do you balance it all when, stuff is hitting the fan? And for me, that is really what makes a good leader. Yes, we're capable, but we also know when to put down the mask, when to allow people to surround us and rally around us and really accept that support. And we don't have to be the strong one all the time. So, in the teaching part of today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about what I call the mask of capability. And it's really a mask and a cape, right? It's that superwoman cape that we wear when we're like, yeah, I got this. And, we really feel like we have to put on a show. And it starts in childhood. A lot of the leadership breakdown episodes, when I talk about personality type, when I talk about productivity constraints, those kinds of things, because I have a behavioral science background, right? If you don't know, I was in the Army and I was in behavioral science there. And so a lot of what I built in my leadership programs really stems on emotional triggers, childhood wounds, because I realized that the leaders that we grew up to be were a shadow of the leaders that we were surrounded by. Let's just say our parents. We follow a certain leadership style, or we tend to, you know, go completely opposite of a leadership style that we did not agree with. And so when we are praised when we are young for being capable, right? This is when, like, oh, the applause. We perform for the applause. And we realize, oh, this behavior gets me applause. So why don't I keep doing this so I can keep getting praised? Right? And if being capable, being the one who does it all, who supports everyone else, if that's what gives you quote unquote applause, right? Because we're not talking about everyone's clapping for you, like when you're learning how to walk and everyone's like, yay, good job. But it's that same concept, right? When people around you, like they give you the verbal applause or something like that, we take on this mask of capability that we feel like we have to wear when, even though, stuff's hitting the fan, we have to put on a smile and get back out there and keep performing. And I'm saying this from a performing arts background, right? I grew up dancing hula since I was age 4, and the show must go on. And I come from a multi-generational hula performing arts family, like music, dance, all of it, all of the above. Everyone had a different skill set, and you know that put on a smiling face. Luckily, the halal, or the group that I was trained under, wasn't as rigorous as the one that my mom was trained under, because she said, yes, like literally, like put a smile on, and they made you wear Vaseline on your lips. And we're not talking about chapstick Vaseline. We're talking about like Vaseline where it's like, I do not want this gunk on my teeth, so I'm going to keep my mouth wide open and keep smiling because I don't want Vaseline on my teeth. So that's where I'm coming from. And this is the background that I grew up in. And when I'm talking about the mask of capability and the cape, the Wonder Woman cape, that we can do it all, or we have to look back and see where were these roots formed in us, because until we can really get to the root cause, we won't really understand how to stop doing that. And yes, being the one who's capable gets us a lot of applause and accolade. But how do we put down the mask? How do we put down the superwoman cape at the end of the day and get the rest and recovery that we need in order to get back up again tomorrow? A lot of us are running on, adrenaline and caffeine every day. And it's like, I know that specifically because my body broke down and I had stage 4 adrenal burnout, and I had no idea that I was even in that stage. I was just in survival mode, going day in, day out, and just looking at my life and saying, oh, this is normal, because I have been in performance my entire life. Like I said, I've been dancing hula since I was age 4. And so performance was just a part of my life. And I come from a divorced family. My parents split when I was 2 years old. So there was a lot of performing for applause, being accepted in both families, especially when my parents remarried, created new core families with their new spouses. I'm like, how do I fit into this dynamic? What will make me acceptable? What will get me applause? And a lot of that was the performance, good grades, performing on stage. Anytime I had performances, both of my parents would come. And so, right, when we're young, we get these ideas that if I do this, I get what I want. And I got both of my parents in the same room for be it an hour or however long the performance is. But I was like, wow, the family is together again. You know how our brain will associate those things. So, you know, today we're going a little deep. One, I'm just in that zone, with this whole parasite cleanse. I've had to really slow down a lot and just processing the death of a dear friend. It's just been this really reflective time for me. So, we're not doing a whole lot of teaching today. We're kind of going deep. Yeah. So there's that piece. And one of the other things that I use in my coaching business when I'm talking to my clients, there's this thing called the time wheel. And I've talked about it on my previous podcast, the Burnt Out Entrepreneur podcast. But really, the time wheel was a concept that was dropped into me as a download back in 2015 when I first started my entrepreneurial journey. It was before I even became a coach, but it was really this concept that I had, like I love acronyms. And it was one of the things that I feel was a download for me because the time wheel is a concept that I came up with as a project manager. I was like, why is there so much pressure to perform in project management? Everything is, numbers, statistics, resources, everything's tracked. And what I saw, my brain is really wired to recognize patterns, which is what makes me a good project manager. So there were four currencies that every project is led from. And as I mirrored it onto the four archetypes, I was like, wow. So anyway, the four parts of the time wheel are time, ideas, money, and energy. Those are the four currencies we always lead from. And how that works is time and money are on opposite sides of the wheel, right? Because it's always, as a project manager, it was always, are we on time, right? How are we managing our time? And money, are we under budget? And so those two would be not fighting themselves, but right, if we were not on time, right, what would we have to do? We would have to spend more money on manpower in order to meet a specific deadline if we were falling short. Or if we just didn't have the money, we would have to expand the deadline in order to be and maintain our budget. So those are the two constraints that I would use as a project manager to get the job done. And then on the other side of the time wheel, there's ideas and energy. Because I don't know about you, but raise your hand if you have been in a meeting and there were so many ideas thrown around. What about this? What about that? Right? So many ideas generated. Measuring the performance of those ideas really gets down to execution. And so with execution, what do we need? We need energy to execute. So right when I got this download, I was like, whoa, ideas versus energy. You have a lot of ideas, but do you have the energy to execute on every single one of them? A lot of times, no, we don't. And again, this is where that mask of capability is going to come in. Like, if you are quote unquote capable or want to be seen as capable, you are going to manage these four resources very effectively because, right, if you overrun your time, you overrun your budget, money, right? You have so many ideas, but you don't execute on them. You look like a scatter. All of those, when we are out of scope for any four of these resources, we tend to hide behind that mask of capability. And so, how these four quadrants overlap with the four archetypes, right? It's the shepherd, right? This is the one who is the overgiver, the people pleaser. And that's why their time is always overrun because they're letting what I call OPP, other people's problems, commandeer their time, and they're not able to really control their time effectively. And then you have the influencer who, you know, she's the one that has a lot of ideas, but again, she's scattered and ungrounded. And that's how she shows up as a leader when she does not have her ideas under control. And then you have the driver who is, ruled by the money quadrant and, her drive for success gives her this vibe of like everything's urgent and everything needs to get taken care of right now because output, 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 right? She has this output addiction. And then you have the last but not least, right? You have the critic. And this is the one who is a perfectionist and the energy piece, right? She does do a lot of executing, but nothing comes to completion because she's spending so much energy trying to make it perfect because she grew up with a critical parent who turned her into this perfectionist. And like everything she does or did was scrutinized. And now everything she does today is scrutinized and not necessarily by her peers or it's her, right? She has carried the baggage and the weight of that critical parent into her life and her business. And so the critic really struggles with perfectionism and analysis paralysis and like going around the mountain a lot. And she's the opposite of the ideas person where she has the ideas and she does not have a problem with execution, but it's overly executed. Things keep, you know, being worked on, but it's like nothing gets done because it's never good enough. So she can't ever check the box and mark it complete because so she has issues with the execution piece. And so when you have these overruns in any one of these quadrants, and you can have overruns in any of these quadrants at any time, but why I paired up the archetypes with each quadrant is because that's like your Achilles heel. If you are the shepherd, time is always going to be your Achilles heel because you care more about people than profit. And so you're always going to put people first at the expense of your time. But here's the shift. If you are struggling with any one of these quadrants, time, ideas, money, and energy, and you really resonate with the archetypes where like, oh yes, I am a shepherd and my time is always being overrun, or I am the critic. And I get it. Sometimes it's hard for people to really resonate with the critic because there's some negative connotation to it. But one, I had to come up with names for them. And they are modeled after the DISC methodology, but it's a combination of, learning the DISC process, but also there's the four temperaments. And so there were a lot of four-pronged personality tests that, like, I'm a personality test junkie. Okay. Like, if you have, like, what Disney princess are you quiz, I will probably take it. And so, all of that to say, I've taken so many of these personality quizzes and I saw the overlap and I wanted to really create my own version of it because I saw that, hey, there were these parallels with the D in the disc and, with this archetype from the four temperaments. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so, and reading all the results, because right? Why take a quiz if you're not going to indulge in the results? I was like, oh my gosh, I was seeing these patterns. And again, part of my design, the way that I was created, is to be a pattern recognizer. And I was like, wow, there are these patterns. And then when I looked at, the personality types and I saw the time wheel that I created, I was like, wow, like there is such a pattern here. And so the shift that I want anyone listening today to make is not to use these archetypes as a crutch, but to really look at it and see, how can I leverage this understanding and turn it into a strength, right? How can I turn the mask of capability, whether your strength is with time, ideas, money, or energy, according to your archetype, and how do I leverage that so that I can put down the mask of capability? I can rest, I don't know, for some of you out there, especially the drivers, you're like, rest? Who is time to rest? The critics as well, right? You guys are the most driven of these archetypes, and I get it. But rest really is success, because when we're not rested, right, there are things that happen in our brain overnight. And especially if we're trying to be a leader, if we're trying to be a CEO of our business, there's gray matter, like just the waste that happens from the brain processing its data during the day. There's gray matter that develops in your brain, and the only time that it drains itself or cleans itself is at night when we're asleep. Even when we're carrying these burdens in our brain, right? We're leaders. We carry burdens in our brain. We carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. And, the one thing that we can do as a leader is put down the mask of capability and really put on the persona of rest. Because if we're not thinking, if we're not contemplating, if we're not doing all those things, how are we going to come up with new ideas? Right? Look at the time wheel again. How are we going to, one, generate new ideas that are actually good and cohesive, make sense, and how we're going to have the energy to execute if we're not resting? And how are we going to have white space in our schedule to do the things like recreational things, restful things, right? Time as a factor. And then the money. Yes, we can talk about money in all different kinds of ways, but in this particular case, how can we have, right? All those other resources have to line up in order for us to create wealth. And so we have to put down the mask of capability in order to really see the time wheel from a clean lens and not from one of over leveraging those four resources. All right. God never called us to be superhuman. He didn't. Right. Because even in 2 Corinthians 12:9, it says, grace is sufficient for you because my power is made perfect in weakness. It's like, I don't want to be weak. I don't want to rest. I don't want to seem like I'm incapable. I don't want to seem weak. But how can we really surrender to what's happening when we're strong arming everything? Right? It's like, come here. We're taking life by the horns. It's like, well, what if we just want to enjoy a nice steak instead? Sorry if you're vegan. But you know what I'm saying, right? How can we use our softness, that rest, that contemplation? Because, right, if we're not thinking as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, we're dead in the water, right? We have to constantly be coming up with new ideas, innovating. And if we're not taking the time to think and contemplate and create, which happens during the downtime, during the rest time, right? How are we going to get to our next level? And what if your ability to do all of that, to pause, feel, and be fully seen was the key to overflow? So here's the deal. If you have been praised your whole life for being the strong one, but you're privately crumbling under the weight of it all, if you're crumbling, first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with me. The last 2 weeks, I was in bed a lot doing this parasite cleanse, and coupled with the grief and the loss, I could have let that own me, define me. But because I was able to reframe rest is success, it's like, no, I'm not going to push. I'm not going to keep going. I need to rest now so that I can perform better later. And so, like, I don't have to pretend to be capable. I can put it down. I can ask for what I need. And I get it, right? It's the hardest thing in the world when we're trying to ask for what we need. And as leaders, we think we have to hold it all. Like, if I'm the leader, I can't ask for help, which is the exact opposite, right? Leaders delegate. Leaders don't do, right? If you're a doer, you're not a leader. Like, a leader needs to learn how to delegate and tell people what they need, because, right, as a leader, we are the visionary, we're the creators, and we have people, tools, AI, whatever you want to use to, create your creation. I'll just say it that way. And if you feel like I have been, like, and even with the status of the world right now, there's a lot that's just happening. And if you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders and it's just been a lot, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just something's out of alignment. And I encourage you to take the CEO Codes quiz. It's something new that I've created, and it really is like understanding your archetype, the four that we talked about today, right? The driver, the influencer, the shepherd, the critic, understanding your archetype and knowing, because when you take the quiz, I talk about your time wheel quadrant and I talk about the Achilles heels with each, um, you know, archetype and how it really affects the way we show up and we lead and we run our businesses. And for me, it's been the greatest tool that I have. And I started using it with kind of everyone when I first found out about it. When I was still in corporate, I was like, whoa, this is amazing because there's even ways to communicate between the types. And right, the driver, she's very driven, very bold, just doesn't take no for an answer, right? She figures out a way to do it, get it done. The driver. And then you have someone like the shepherd who puts, people over profit. And it's like, well, how can we make everyone happy and still get the output versus like being more bulldozerish? I'm not saying that the driver is heartless and like runs people over, but I am saying that there are nuances to each archetype and there are positives and negatives to each, right? And so that's what you get when you take the CEO codes quiz. You get your CEO type, your archetype, and it's really about how you're built to lead. There are quizzes that tell you, okay, if you have this output, thou shalt do things this way. And for me, when I created this quiz and I combined a lot of different modalities in order to create the quiz, I said, no, I want people to understand that this is a reflection of their God given identity. This is literally how you were built. This is how you were created to respond to the world. And so it's not, a box that I'm trying to put people in. It really is a way for you to finally understand yourself. And because when I started studying this, I was like, that's why I do this thing. And especially if you've been like the black sheep in your family and like people thought like, why is she so different? It's like, well, you are different. You were created from a different cloth. And that's the cloth that, God designed for you to be wrapped in. And so, anyway, there is the CEO Codes quiz that you can go ahead and take. And, if you're ready to lead from peace and not pressure, I'm also offering decoding sessions. So this is after you take your quiz and you're like, okay, wow, these are my CEO codes. Cool. There's also a decoding session that you can book on the end of that. And in that session, what we do is we go through your codes, and like, if you have any questions, like you have a burning desire to really understand and embrace your God-given identity, that's what we do. We kind of take it apart and, get to really understand who God created you to be, why He created you this way, and how you can leverage it to become a better leader. And that's why I call it the CEO codes, because a true leader is the CEO of her business. It's one thing to own a business and to operate a business versus being the leader, being the CEO of your business. So, coming back around, right? Leadership was never meant to be lonely, right? It's only lonely at the top because you don't understand yourself. You don't understand the codes in other people. And so that's what keeps us separate. When we don't understand, we don't tap in to that identity. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this show today. And everything you need is going to be in the show notes for the quiz and for the decoding sessions. And I'll just see you guys again next time. Okay, bye.